Put on your sweats. No need to shave. Kick back and relax, because it's Philosophy Friday with Matthew Weiss, where we start off the weekend casual. Hey folks, Matthew Weiss here, weiss-sound.com and Weiss Advice here on YouTube. Welcome to Philosophy Friday. Today, I'm going to be divulging the secret to getting great mixes. This one technique that will always work. Practice. That's what it is. Practice. And I know that's going to be immediately disappointing and it's not very entertaining. Don't worry, we're going to get into some really entertaining stuff in a second. But the reality of the situation is until you put your hands onto a mix and you listen and you experiment and you lather, rinse, repeat, you're just not going to get good. That's all that there is to it. If you do that, if you get your hands on a record and you start working on it, you are going to get better. It takes time, and I'm here to give you guidance so that it takes less time, for sure. I'm going to give you all the information that you need to be able to do it as quickly and as efficiently as possible. And that's really it in a nutshell. But now we're going to get into a whole bunch of stuff that the internet would lead you to believe will be the magic secret sauce that doesn't require practice. And I'm going to explain not only what those things are, but also where they come from, where in a sense they can be useful, and why ultimately they don't work as a one magical silver bullet fix-all solution. All right, let's start with LCR mixing. What is LCR mixing? Left, center, right. That's where all the elements in your mix get panned hard left, dead center, or hard right. Now, I don't know why people have decided that this somehow is going to make your mixing great. To me, it just sounds like a limitation. And in fact, it's actually based on a limitation. It's based on the limitation of pre-1965, 1970 consoles that had a limited number of tracks and only had so many pan positions, right? Well, here's the thing. Yes, there is a good reason to use hard pan positions. The left, the center, and the right are the strongest positions within your pan spectrum. So things certainly should, can, and will go there. But because we have the ability to create nuance, there are plenty of reasons why we should use partial panning positions. And I can come up with some really easy ones right off the bat. Maybe you have some kind of a textural hand drum or something, or percussive element that's adding to the groove and adding to the rhythm. If you put it off to the right, it sounds distracting. If you put it dead center, it kind of gets lost a little bit. So maybe you want it toward the center so it feels like it's glued to the record, but not so much in the center that it's getting hidden by other things and not so far off to one side that it completely disconnects and distracts. You might find a little partial panning position that's maybe like 20% to the right where it kind of lives in its own space. It's still connected to the center, but it's not distracting to the ear. That one comes up all the time, just for me personally. Another one that comes up all the time is ping pong delays. If I have a vocal and I want the delay to create some kind of a stereo image and give it something like a little bit of space, I might want something that's a little bit wider than, say, just a mono delay, but I might not want something where I'm literally hearing delays dancing around the left and right side and like completely either like way low in the mix or just super distracting because there's something that keeps changing position. So panning my ping pong into like 30% left, 30% right helps to create a little bit of width and a little bit of dimension without being distracting. That's another one that we use all the time. Now, the people who do follow the LCR approach might say, well, you don't have to strictly use left, center, right. You could do those partial pan positions. You're just acknowledging that the points of strength are left, center, and right. And in that case, I would say, well, in that case, you're just mixing. Right? So there is some reason, but it's just why create that limitation? It doesn't make any sense. Another one that's kind of similar with your panning positions and stereo field is mixing in mono. People will say, mix your record in mono and then just save the stereo stuff for the end. Cool, but how are you going to know where to pan stuff? How are you going to know how to set up your reverbs, like the width of your reverb and how spacious it is left to right? What if you want to do things that mess with stereo field dimension and perception, like Haas panning, perception panning, things like that, where you need a stereo field in order to make them work? And also things sound different in the stereo setup than they do all in mono. Like, yeah, you can EQ things to fit together and not overlap in mono, and in mono that might sound great, and sometimes that's the way to go, but when you open it up to stereo, you might realize that you've made too much room in your record. You've actually made your record too open sounding. That can happen. So why do we mix in mono? Where does that come from? Well, it comes from the idea that, first of all, we want to have mono compatibility most of the time. If we want to know how a record is going to translate, mono tells us a lot, because when we're far away from our speakers, the image starts to collapse closer to mono. If we're in a space where there's a mono playback, like say a department store or a lot of clubs, then we're going to want to know that our record still works in mono for those kinds of playback environments. On top of that, there are certain things like if you have lots of background vocals stacked on top of each other, sometimes it's easier to get the exact EQing correct when you hear it all in mono, because the overlapping frequencies that start to build up really reveal themselves very quickly. So there's certainly reasons to work in mono, and mono is a powerful tool, but at the end of the day, would you mix a surround sound record in stereo or mono? Does that make sense? No, because how can you make use of the surround sound field if you've limited your mix to a 2-speaker playback? It's the same idea. How can you make the best use of your stereo field if you've eliminated your stereo field while you're mixing? But some people it works. Hey, look, whatever works for people, I guess. Another one is the pink noise matching. So pink noise is... Well, let's start with white noise. White noise is all frequencies across the frequency spectrum being generated at an equal amplitude, same level of energy. But because of the way that we hear things, we actually hear things on a curve where lower frequency stuff we don't hear as readily as higher frequency stuff. Pink noise is an adjustment to that. It pushes the lower stuff up in energy, and we get sort of this like triangular shape to the pink noise spectrum where the lows are higher and it goes down toward the highs. And this creates the perception of all frequencies being at the same level. So we're perceiving all frequencies at the same level with pink noise. Pink noise matching is when you take your mix, you run it through a spectrum analyzer, and you make sure that your spectrum kind of matches up with the overall curve of pink noise, right? So the theory behind this is that if you do that, then your record will sound balanced in terms of all of the frequencies. And I get that, and that can be informative, you know, being aware of the Fletcher-Munson effect and that we perceive things differently than what they actually are. That is all important to mixing, but here's the problem. Mixes are not supposed to be balanced in terms of frequency spectrum, because we don't have records that are made up entirely of sine waves. We have records that are made up of musical elements, and musical elements just don't play that nice with the frequency spectrum. We need to have our leads commanding our space. We need to have our backups sitting in the right place, and sometimes that requires having things that are out of balance in order for the record to feel balanced. I very rarely have ever tried to do any kind of pink noise matching and not thought to myself afterwards, particularly with like hip-hop stuff or club music or anything like that, that the bass was loud enough. It's almost never the case. So pink noise matching might be good for a reference if you need one, but frankly, I would just avoid that one entirely. So I got a couple more here. Those are sort of the main ones that I have grievances with, but there's definitely a few that I do want to mention here. One is going to be the gain staging thing. And again, there's truth that like getting your levels set up in a way where it's going to play nicely with your analog gear, if you're using analog gear, or, that you have space to work in terms of being able to turn things up or down once you're starting your mix. That all is very useful, but that is not going to be the secret to a successful mix. Just because you've given yourself 18 dB of headroom or whatever, or 12 dB of headroom, to turn things up or down, that's just going to make things easier to mix, but it's certainly not going to solve your mix problems for you. High passing everything. Like if you high pass something, it makes room in the low end. You're getting rid of frequencies that you can't hear. Okay, but here's the thing, if you can't hear it, what's the problem? Sometimes there will be recordings, like particularly acoustic recordings, where we're picking up a lot of low end that is, not necessary to be there. And sure, that's why a high pass filter is developed. Sometimes you'll have DC offset in a sound where you have like sub 10 hertz it's built way up and you don't hear it, but it's taking up space. Sure, a high pass filter is useful for that. But when you get to the end of your mix and you're then high passing your entire mix at your mix bus, maybe there's just something in there that needs to be high passed or just have a low shelf taken some of the energy out then if you're running into that. Or more importantly, maybe you're just doing it to do it and you think that somehow it's magically going to give you more headroom when it probably won't. Maybe it might even end up taking headroom away because that's not really how EQs work. Or you're just looking at a situation where you're high passing a bunch of elements that have no low energy anyway, where at best it's not doing anything. That synth flute that you have in your mix probably doesn't need to have a high pass if it's a VST. Chances are there's not a lot of content that's happening below 200 hertz. You can probably leave it alone and it's going to sound better. Let's see. Another one. Oh, speaking of at the end of your mix, leaving your mix bus completely empty, having nothing on your master fader or on your submix group. People say, when you're sending to mastering, don't have an EQ on your mix bus, don't have a compressor on your mix bus, don't have anything on your mix. Nonsense. Every record that you've heard that has been successful has probably had something on the mix bus. And it's true, the more you can get going in the mix the way that you want it to work, the better, but there's certain effects that just work better on mix bus. Compression, when you compress the overall record, it's not the same as when you compress individual elements. It has a completely different effect. So if you take a compressor off your mix bus and you wanted that effect, then you're going to lose that. There's nothing that's going to improve your mix by taking away part of something that your mix wants. And that can apply to anything. I'll put some saturation on my mix bus. A lot of the times I'll do some minor EQing on my mix bus because what am I going to do? Go through and put the same EQ on every individual element? Why? What a waste of time. Compression on my mix bus, I want things to move together. It has to be on the mix bus for that to work. So yeah, I don't know why leaving the mix bus untouched is somehow been purported to be the way to go. It's definitely not. And then I guess the last one that's worth mentioning is having a certain RMS or LUFS level in target. This one's a little complicated because there is some technical stuff and technical limitations, particularly if you're doing sound for broadcast. But in general, and also that streaming sites, some are normalizing, some aren't. In general, you don't want to be making non-musical decisions when you're mixing music. So there isn't any reason to say, okay, my target RMS should be -5 or my target RMS should be -14. You should be thinking along the lines of what's going to make this sound the best. And then if outside influences are coming in and demanding that you change something in a certain way or that you make something feel a certain way or shape to a certain standard that might be out there, then you might have to adjust your perception of how you're going to make that work and then make it work. And that typically happens more in the louder direction. We still get a lot of notes that say we want to make this louder, we want to make this brighter. And you go, okay, well, there's an outside force that's telling me that the music needs to sound different than what it's asking for. Okay, I'll make this work, I'll figure out how to do it. But at no point are we arbitrarily saying, okay, this has to be -5, or this has to be -14, or whatever it might be, because those are just numbers, and numbers have nothing to do with the way it sounds. Two records at the same number could sound completely different, both in perceived loudness and feel. So I definitely would stay away from having target numbers being what defines your mix choices. That's a trap to make a subpar mix, for sure. Okay, guys, just wanted to get that stuff out there. Once again, the original meaning of this is that the solution is to practice. Develop a musical ear, experiment, and get better. There is nothing else. There are no silver bullets, and I am here to help you do that. So, if you dig what I'm doing on this channel, hit the subscribe with the notifications so you get notified. If you like this video, hit the thumbs up so that the world knows that you like it. And if there's anything you want to see me discuss, drop that in the comments section. I do reply to the comments as much as possible. Lastly, you know the saying, we are musicians, sound is our instrument, and I will catch you next time.